The Space God Memoirs. Episode 22. I could hear the zooming noise of blaster fire behind me, and Trevel shouting, "Get them!" I ran faster, hoping Rayleigh could keep up as I rushed across the flat ground between us and the old wall. It felt like forever, but I eventually reached it, grabbing onto the wall and hurling my body behind it. I reached for Rayleigh and pulled her towards me. I could feel her breath, heavy, labored. We both lay there for an instant, trying to get our bearings. "We need to find some place to hide, Keph," Rayleigh said, panting as she looked at me. My head darted around as I tried to think of where. Everything was flattened, this old port reduced to nothing but rubble and garbage. "Maybe we can circle around," I said. "Get back to the pass." I stood to my feet and pulled up Rayleigh with me. Off to our right, away from the tower, I could see a few rusty iron posts still standing. It wasn't much, but it might give us a bit more cover. "Come on, Rayleigh," I said to my companion. She paused, reaching for something in her sleeve that I couldn't quite make out. Just then, my attention was drawn to a distortion in the air near those barrels. Scrag. I tried pulling my shiv, but by then it was already too late. He appeared next to us, Trevel's the Slayer, phasing into view in his crimson and purple armor, twist blade in hand. With a single deft motion, he stepped forward, thrusting with his blade, which expanded out straight into Rayleigh's chest. She let loose a small whimper, then fell against the wall, her eyes rolling back. Trevel wrenched his blade from her body, blood gushing forth. Rayleigh fell to the side, rolling limply to the ground, dropping whatever she had been holding. An instant later, someone else stepped out from behind the wall. It was Sir Alien, his helmet on as he held his blaster at his side. "Time to die, guide," he said with a chuckle. Double scrag, I thought, as Alien began to raise his blaster. Rayleigh wasn't moving. More blood had pooled under her. "Please be alive," I thought at her unmoving body, all the while doubting my own optimism. Felt a horrible sinking sensation. My eyes watery and my stomach grindy. "Back off, knight," said Trevel, said Alien. "This one's my kill." "Whatever, fanatic," responded Alien. "Been looking to kill this bastard for a while." He pointed his blaster right at me. He stood only a few feet away, so close I could see the green glow building up in the gun's barrel. This was it, I told myself. I was going to die. Nowhere to run this time. Yet as I stared into the neon green glow of Alien's blaster, I felt no fear, only a curious kind of clarity. All of my emotions melted away, all the rage and fear I should have been feeling at that moment. There was a tingle of energy rushing up my spine, like connecting with the ship. For a moment, everything was frozen, slowed to a halt. My situation became clear. One murderer on my left, another on my right. What was I going to do about it? Turning suddenly from Alien, I lunged for Trevos with my shiv in hand. He stepped aside with ease, dodging my clumsy attack. My momentum caused me to fall straight to the ground. Or rather, I let myself fall. Alien's blaster went off where I had been, a green beam zipping through the air. Trevos once more raised his twist blade above his head. He flipped the mad weapon twice in the air and it grew to the size of a greatsword. He hefted it up with both hands, ready to swing down at me. I grabbed a handful of ash and dirt from the ground and threw it into his face. The Slayer screamed and dropped his twist blade, trying to wipe the ash from his eyes. I bounded to my feet and hurled a punch at Trevos. I wasn't half the warrior he was, but when I clocked him right between his eyes, he fell straight onto his back. Alien stood there, clicking away at the trigger of his blaster, but I knew it would take that old thing a few more seconds to recharge. He lowered it, one hand reaching for the sword at his hip. Reacting by instinct, I hefted up my shiv and jammed it right into his armpit, where the metal was joined by rubber. He grunted in pain as the blade struck true, going with him as he collapsed forward. I rushed to Rayleigh and touched her neck, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. There was no breath, not even a twitch. The twist blade had pierced her chest, had gone all the way through her. Trevos was still on the ground. I could hear him groaning, grasping his head. I should just take his own blade and cut his throat, I told myself, seeing it by his feet, retracted back into a small knife. Then I noticed what Rayleigh had dropped right beside it. The lift orb, from our experiment. Its metal surface shone in the faint sunlight. I reached out, not knowing which object I was reaching for, blade or orb. There was movement to my left. Alien stood up, my shiv still embedded in his armpit, but very much alive. I grabbed the lift orb and ran. I wasn't even sure where I was running to, only away, across more flat terrain covered in broken crates and ruined walls. I ducked just as I heard the discharge of a blaster behind me again, a green flash above my head. I took cover behind one of those old boxes, only for a few seconds, catching my breath and then going into a slightly crouched run, Alien behind me, his heavy boots clanking as they slammed the ground. I kept running, dodging around the remains of rusted barrels and half-collapsed storage crates, trying my best to use the eroding walls of the old port for cover. I was barely thinking now, my heart beating so strongly I could collapse, my lungs burning from the exertion. I was basically going on automatic, though deep down I knew that I couldn't run from him forever. Eventually I found my back against solid metal. The tower! I must have circled around to the back side of it while trying to strafe around the gunfire. No, this wasn't the tower proper, but one of its support structures. A huge metal tube that ran from the ground, then took a right angle some 100 feet up, connected with the main tower after a bit. As I pressed my hands against it, there was a slight hum and a warmth. Was it some kind of power source? Well, I didn't have much time to ponder it. From behind a hill of rubble in the distance, I could clearly see Sir Scragger step out in his blue and red armor. The bastard took a quick shot from where he stood, though the distance caused the plasma to dissipate well before it reached me. Immediately after, he broke into a run again. As the knight sped towards me, I looked for a place I could run or hide. Nope. Nowhere to go where he wouldn't straight up shoot me. I reached behind me, to the pipe. There was a handhold. I spun around and grabbed tight, looking up to see that there was a ridged grating of some sort I could probably scale. Well, scrag it, I thought. I was a decent climber. Certainly better than some guy in a bulky suit. I began pulling myself up, the metal handholds digging into the skin of my palms, but I continued to climb anyway. I peeked down to see Alien, now at the base of the pipe. He raised his blaster. Another green beam fired. I looked away and twisted to the right, barely hanging on one hand as the beam struck the metal wall where I had been. I continued to climb, hoping he wouldn't try to follow, but in seconds I could hear his heavy limbs clanging against the handholds, more agile than I would have thought. I continued, the skin on my left hand torn open and a trickle of blood oozing out. Finally, I made it to the top and pulled myself up. I was now around 100 feet or so above ground. Ahead of me, the pipe stretched on horizontally about a dozen yards, until it ended at the looming wall of the tower proper. I saw one of Alien's armored hands pulling itself over the ledge behind me, and once more I broke into a run. I dashed across the pipe, almost tumbling off as I balanced along the narrow top. At last, I found myself against the huge rounded wall of the tower itself. No time to look up even, I realized. Alien was right on me, his armor letting him practically skate across the length of the pipe. He coasted across and hurled an enhanced punch at me. I pulled to the side, and his gauntlet rang heavy against the building. His other hand was reaching for the blaster. It had recharged again. I grabbed him by that wrist, pushing upward. He pulled the trigger and a green beam discharged into the air above us. Alien hit me square in the chest with his striking hand. It felt like I had just been hit by a rusha. The pain was immense and sharp, accompanied by a sickening crack. All I saw was a red haze that after a few seconds turned into a series of dots, swimming around the edges of my vision. I couldn't breathe, and for a moment I figured that this was the end, that he had punched my heart straight out, and that I was basically a dead man. I looked into the black visor of his masked helm, and I could feel my chest erupting in agony. Then I was brought back to reality with my next pained breath, to see that the fist that had just struck me was now around my throat. His other hand had the gun pointed at my face, ready to shoot again. I figured I had one chance left to not die immediately. The lift orb. I grabbed it from my sleeve and depressed its activation button. It hung suspended in the air. Get him, I thought at the orb, hoping it worked like our ship.
What the scrag is?
He began to speak, but stopped as the orb flew at him, then entered one of the open tubes on his mask, the exact spot I was looking at. He shook his head furiously as the thing zipped into his helmet. Alien let out a roar. I could hear the lift orb clanging around in there. I reached for the wall behind me, my hand grasping around a smaller pipe. My free hand I grabbed onto my old shiv, still embedded in his armor. I tugged it loose, blood pouring from the wound. He screamed in pain and I gave him a good kick. I clung to the tower for dear life as I watched the knight lose his balance on the rounded pipe and flip sideways, right off the edge, where his body tumbled as it fell about 100 feet. From my vantage, I didn't see him land, but heard a loud crash. That was the end of Sir Scragger. I slumped against the side of the wall and just stared out at nothing for a few moments. I was alive, for now, and Buckethead below hopefully wasn't. I breathed a sigh of relief. Well, actually, it really hurt, sending tendrils of pain pouring from my chest and through my upper body. Eek. I realized he must have broken something with that cyber punch of his. I could have contemplated exactly how bad the injury was, but I figured that just dealing with the pain was enough for now. I would worry about further injuries if I managed to survive the day. So I got to my feet, taking a moment to survey the lands. The flattened city that spread out to the south. The vast ocean to the north, all shrouded in that perpetual twilight. Just below, though, on the ground by the pipe I had climbed up, I could see movement. The knights checking on their buddy. No way I was going to hang around for them, I thought. So I turned back to where the actual tower began. The wall was massive, stretching out of view as it rounded off in both directions, lined with rivets of black metal. There was that smaller pipe, too, that I had grabbed onto during my kick, which went upward, where after about 6 feet it split off into multiple pipes covered in wires, in an assemblage that looked to go up and sideways, too. Yeah, I guess from my time around the lab that this was some kind of power line. What machinery was being powered inside that place I had only the vaguest clue. Only that it was probably connected to those trials the maniacs down there were undergoing. Well, other than the maniacs who were just below hunting me down. Scrag. Figured the only way to go is up. So I grabbed onto that pipe. It hurt, but I pulled myself up and started climbing, hand over hand up the length of the little piped network, using wire bundles or notches as hand and footholds. I climbed, not really knowing where I was going, but assuming that it was probably better than down below, trying to fight the most elite warriors in the world. It started to get cold after about 10 minutes. Or maybe I was just noticing the cold more. But the wind up there was constant and had a definite chill to it. It was all I could hear, too. The constant whooshing and whistling of the wind as it wound around the circumference of the world's tallest building. Soon after that, I could start to feel it in my hands as a throbbing, biting cold. I paused a few times to rub my hands, but I found it did little good and kept climbing. Soon enough, I could barely feel my hands at all, but I could still feel my chest, damaged and bloody as it was. It seemed like I had probably climbed around an hour when I paused to look down. My eyes went wide as I turned my view outward, the vast rocky landscape of the world spreading before me, my sight now extending over the nearby mountains and across the black, dead lands, the hazy, dust-covered desert. I could see the edges of the chasm even. For a moment I was able to ignore the throbbing pain and the biting cold. Then a gust of wind hit me and I had to look away. I continued to climb and climb, pain and exhaustion spreading through my limbs. After 10 more minutes I had slowed considerably, my tired muscles only able to fathom a few feet up at a time, my hands about to go numb and fall off from the cold. It was tough to breathe up there too, each breath coming out as a weak gasp. I could feel lightheadedness coming over me rapidly. I wondered if I was climbing to my death. Probably, I figured, but I continued on anyway because, well, I didn't see what else I could do. Cold, hurting, and tired, I was probably at the point just before I would have just given up and let go, when I saw the opening, a square-shaped entry about 4 feet wide, covered in a hatched metal grate. Was it an air vent? An exhaust port for some kind of fuel? I didn't know, and I didn't care. I pulled on it. There was some give, but it was, indeed, secured in place. I hung onto the nearby pipe with one hand. With the other I reached for my trusty shiv. There were no screws or bolts, thankfully. The grate was kept in place by what might have been air compression or something. With a bit of effort it popped out and fell right down the side of the tower. I didn't wait for it to hit bottom, and just pulled myself inside. Immediately the sound of the rushing wind grew muted, along with the painful cold of the outside. It was cramped here, so much that I had to crawl. It smelled clean and chemically inside, and if I had been born into a more industrial society, I would have thought that it smelled like something newly made, like a new vehicle or machine. The duct had a few visible panels on the side, but was otherwise featureless, and just kept on going forward, into the tower. A faint light shone at the end, orange and blinking at a slow rate. No obvious danger, so I let myself relax. This was the most comfortable, cramped duct I had been in for a long time. My thoughts lingered on Rayleigh, the image of her last moments, the sight of her body laying still upon the ground, bloody and unmoving. It had happened so fast. It didn't seem real. It was all almost comical, like it had only happened in some feverish fantasy. Feeling the exhaustion of the climb coming over me, I quickly faded into a deep and hazy sleep. Yet the dreams arrived, quick and vivid. The tower. I watched as the champions ran their way through a gauntlet of traps and tricks, navigating mazes and dodging blades that spun from walls. Their progress was steady and meticulous as they ventured upward and upward still, each floor claiming lives, but each loss of their number strengthening their resolve, a necessary sacrifice in the bigger picture. Then I was outside of the tower, viewing it from a distance, my point of view ascending up and up along its floors, until it reached above the clouds and met with a ruby-red beam at the top further still. I rode that beam into the spaces beyond the clouds, beyond Aruvis, and all of existence degraded into a shadowy, fluid state, a membrane of humanoid forms that swirled and twisted, spinning together as they slowly pulsed out something both liquid and electric, though it was neither. I sped straight through them, my dream sense taking in what I can only describe as emotions with form. Little packets of anger and lust, hopes and loves, all flowing together and spinning across a field that seemed to extend about a mile above the planet. I punched through that with a surge. Then I was looking at the ship again. The ship from before, from the flight to Aruvis, the dream in the prisons. It was ahead of me, inside of a building. A hangar, one room inside of the vast hall whose golden walls seemed to be constantly moving, made up like some gigantic clock that turned and spun with the passage of time. Another was beside me, a woman, her flesh a vibrant cherry red. She held my hand, and I could feel the hot softness of her grip. "This is the moment you have been waiting for," she thought at me. This is what you trained for. No, I thought back at her. I'm just here by accident. You know that's not true. You don't think it, but you know it. I don't know anything, my dreamy self thought back. You merely do not know that you know. I will only tell you this. It is not a matter of becoming, but of remembering. When the time is right, you will remember all you are and what your mission is. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips filled with warmth and moisture. A crackle like thunder, a surge across my body, and then it all faded into oblivion. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Space God Memoirs. Space God is written, performed, and produced by A.M. Arctos. Original musical score by Alpha Colors. Various sound effects created by Industrial Strength Records Incorporated. Please support this podcast by following, rating, and sharing on your favorite social media site. For further info on Space God, its creator, and various other opinions, musings, and thoughts, go to www.spacegodmemoirs.com or follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. If you enjoyed the Space God Memoirs, please consider supporting us by becoming a patron. Check out the Patreon link in our description to learn more.